You think you're protecting yourself, but you're actually preventing your growth. The voice in your head that says, I already know this, I don't need help, or what will they think of me? That's not confidence. That's your ego keeping you stuck. Let's be honest, your ego isn't the source of your power. It's the barrier between you and your purpose. It disguises itself as strength, but in truth, it's fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being in control. If you've ever found yourself stuck, professionally, emotionally, spiritually, it's probably not because you're lazy or untalented. It's because your ego is in the driver's seat, and it's taking you nowhere fast. This message is for the ambitious, the dreamers, the ones who know they're meant for more, but feel blocked. There are 10 key truths about your ego you must understand and eliminate if you're serious about living a life of deep purpose, joy, and freedom. 1. Your ego craves validation. Your soul craves impact at its core. Your ego is addicted to attention. It thrives on external approval, applause, and recognition. The moment someone praises you, it lights up. The moment you're noticed, it stands taller. The ego whispers, you're important only if others see you as important. That belief is dangerous because it disconnects you from your deeper purpose. You begin to chase applause instead of alignment. You start to perform for the crowd instead of listening to your conscience. You might post something online, not because it means something to you, but because you know it'll get likes. You say what people want to hear, even if it contradicts your truth. You dress, talk, and act in ways that attract attention, not because they're authentic, but because they satisfy the ego's hunger for significance. And the worst part, it works temporarily. You get the dopamine hit, the comment, the promotion, the follower. But then what? You're back at zero, craving the next fix. The soul doesn't operate that way. It doesn't care how many people are watching. It cares if you're doing what matters. It's not chasing numbers, it's chasing meaning. Your soul wants to leave a legacy, not just a first impression. It longs to serve, to give, to love, to express. And the conflict begins when your ego is screaming, look at me, while your soul is whispering, let's do something that matters. That inner war is what keeps you feeling restless, even when everything looks good on the outside. You can be admired and still feel empty. You can be followed and still feel lost. That's what happens when validation takes the place of values. You get applause but no peace. You reach goals but feel disconnected. That's the price of letting the ego lead. And the truth is, the more you feed it, with the louder it gets. But the more you listen to your soul, the more fulfilled you become. The ego constantly compares. It says, you're behind. They're doing better. Why don't you have what they have? It measures your worth by your visibility, but your soul doesn't care who's watching. It asks only one question: did you show up fully today? 2. The ego resists growth because growth feels like death. Growth requires change, and change terrifies the ego. That's because the ego is built on identity, who you've been, what you've done, what you've achieved, and how people see you. So, when you attempt to step into something new, whether it's a new level of leadership, a new relationship, or a deeper version of yourself, your ego panics. It feels like something is dying. And in a way it is. The old version of you has to fall away for something greater to emerge, but the ego interprets that shedding as a threat. It clings to what's familiar because the familiar feels safe, even if it's not fulfilling. The ego would rather keep you stuck in mediocrity than risk the vulnerability of transformation. It whispers things like, you're fine where you are. Don't make a fool of yourself. What if you fail? And while those thoughts sound like protection, they're actually walls. They keep you boxed in, playing small, and repeating yesterday instead of creating tomorrow. The ego also thrives on certainty and control. But growth requires surrender, letting go of what you know, trusting the unknown, and stepping into a space where you're not the expert. That's terrifying to the ego because it equates not knowing with weakness. It's why so many people sabotage their next level, not because they can't handle it, but because their ego can't handle not being in control. And when you're growing, you're learning, you're fumbling, you're failing forward. All things the ego despises. Even emotionally, the ego resists growth. It doesn't want you to forgive, because forgiveness means letting go of being right. It doesn't want you to admit you're wrong, because that bruises its image. It doesn't want you to apologize, or take feedback, or ask for help. All of those things chip away at the illusion of perfection the ego is trying to project. So instead of evolving, you keep performing. Instead of expanding, you keep explaining. Instead of being real, you stay rehearsed. But real growth always comes with discomfort. It feels like shedding skin, like leaving the party early, like being misunderstood, like doing the hard thing when the easy way is calling your name. The ego tells you to run from that discomfort, but that's exactly where transformation is trying to take place. The pain you feel isn't always a sign to stop. It's often a sign you're breaking through something that was never meant to stay. 3. Ego confuses confidence with arrogance. One of the ego's most deceptive tricks is disguising arrogance as confidence. It struts around saying, "I've got this," but deep down, it's terrified of being exposed. Real confidence isn't loud. It's rooted. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't dominate the room or need to be the smartest person in it. Confidence walks in knowing its worth and doesn't require anyone else to confirm it. Arrogance, on the other hand, is performative. It's driven by insecurity masked as certainty. The ego can't stand the idea of not being the best. So instead of embracing a growth mindset, it locks into a fixed one. It says, "I already know," which shuts down learning. It says, "I don't need help," which blocks support. It says, "I'm better than them," which kills collaboration. That kind of arrogance may look powerful from the outside, but it's fragile. Because the moment things go wrong, or someone else succeeds, the ego crumbles or lashes out. Confidence is built through self-awareness. It's the result of doing the hard work, owning your flaws, and still believing in your capacity to rise. It's quiet, steady, secure. The ego wants to skip the process and jump to the title. It wants to act confident without being competent. But confidence without competence is just ego in disguise. The most confident people in the world are also the most humble. They ask questions. They listen more than they speak. They know they're still learning. When the ego confuses confidence with arrogance, it stops you from becoming truly great. Because greatness isn't about proving. You don't need to prove anything when you are something. Greatness is about presence, not performance. But the ego wants to impress. It thrives on spotlight. And as long as it's in charge, you'll always be chasing approval rather than mastering your craft. You'll speak to be heard, not to serve. You'll lead to be admired, not to elevate others. True confidence embraces vulnerability. It allows you to say, "I don't know, but I'm willing to learn." The ego sees that as weakness. But in truth, it's strength, because it means you're open. And openness is the gateway to growth. When you let go of needing to look perfect, you unlock the power to actually become better. The ego can't do that because it's too busy managing its image. It's invested in being right instead of doing what's right. 4. The ego tells you to compete, not create. The ego is obsessed with comparison. It constantly scans the room, the feed, the boardroom. The world? Asking one question, am I better than them? It thrives in competition, not because it fuels excellence, but because it feeds its fragile sense of worth. The ego wants to win at all costs. It wants the trophy, the spotlight, the title. But in doing so, it distracts you from what truly matters, creating something that actually makes a difference. When you're caught in the ego's game, your focus shifts from innovation to imitation. You begin to mirror what others are doing, not because it's aligned with your soul, but because it looks successful. Instead of asking, what lights me up, you ask, what's trending? You stop leading with purpose and start chasing popularity. And slowly, your work loses its soul. It might look polished, it might even get attention, but it won't feel meaningful because it didn't come from you. The truth is, real creators don't compete, they contribute. They're not trying to outshine others, they're trying to express what's true for them. They're not watching the crowd, they're listening inward. Creation is driven by curiosity, not comparison. It asks, what's never been done this way before? It's bold. It's messy. It's original. But the ego can't stand that kind of vulnerability. It prefers the comfort of playing someone else's game, even if it means losing yourself in the process. When the ego leads, you start seeing other people's success as a threat. You feel small when they shine. You feel bitter when they win. But that reaction says more about the ego's insecurity than about their achievement. The soul, on the other hand, celebrates others because it's not operating from lack. It knows that someone else's light doesn't dim your own. In fact, real creators get inspired by others' success. They don't copy it. They let it spark something new within them. The competition mindset is exhausting. It keeps you running, comparing, adjusting, pretending. Creation, however, is liberating. It invites you to show up fully as yourself, to build, to serve, to innovate, to imagine. But to do that, you have to silence the voice that says you're behind, not enough, or in someone else's shadow. Because that voice is the ego, and it doesn't care about your fulfillment. It cares about your ranking. And chasing ranking means sacrificing originality, passion, and peace. 5. Your ego makes everything personal. The ego's favorite lens is self-centeredness. It takes everything that happens, every comment, every critique, every silence, and turns it into a personal attack. Someone doesn't text you back. The ego says, they're ignoring you. You don't get the promotion? The ego screams, you're not good enough. Someone gives you feedback. The ego bristles, they don't appreciate you. This is how the ego operates. It interprets every external event through an internal narrative of self, importance, or self-protection. This mindset keeps you on edge. It causes you to overthink, to second-guess, to spiral into emotional reactions that have no grounding in reality. Instead of separating facts from feelings, the ego mixes them together into a cocktail of resentment, shame, or defensiveness. You start to build entire stories around other people's actions, assuming motives that may not even exist. That's not awareness. That's ego-fueled storytelling, and it leads to unnecessary suffering. When everything becomes personal, growth becomes impossible. Because instead of learning from feedback, you defend yourself. Instead of admitting a mistake, you make excuses. Instead of hearing someone's pain, you hear an attack on your identity. The ego can't stand the idea of being wrong, so it makes others the villain just to protect its image. And in the process, it damages relationships, shuts down collaboration, and blocks you from evolving. Leaders who take things personally can't lead with clarity. Creators who take rejection personally stop creating. Friends who take distance personally withdraw before understanding. The ego doesn't allow space for grace. It doesn't pause to ask, what else could this mean? Or, how can I learn from this? It immediately assumes blame, or worse, shame. And when shame shows up, it builds walls instead of bridges. It hides behind pride or silence, rather than leaning into honesty and repair. Detaching from the ego's personalization doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start observing. You become able to look at situations with a clearer, calmer perspective. Not every no is an insult. Not every critique is rejection. Not every delay is disrespect. Sometimes things just happen. People are busy. Situations are complex. Life moves without always catering to your expectations. But the ego doesn't like that kind of neutrality. It wants drama, proof, and identity reinforcement, because that's how it maintains its grip on you. 6. The ego lives for the outcome, not the process. The ego is addicted to the finish line. It only cares about the result, the win, the award, the recognition, the moment of arrival. It rushes through the journey, constantly asking, are we there yet? It doesn't savor the climb. It just wants the summit. But in doing so, it blinds you to the most powerful part of any transformation, the process itself. When you're consumed by the outcome, everything becomes transactional. You work to get something, not to become someone. You chase goals to impress, not to grow. You see success as a destination, not a reflection of who you're becoming on the journey. And because of that, the present moment loses all value. You're always looking ahead, always unsatisfied, always in a state of almost. The process, however, is where mastery is built. It's where you face your fears, develop discipline, learn patience, and shape your character. The process humbles you, stretches you, refines you. It tests what you truly believe, how badly you want it, and whether you're willing to do the inner work. But the ego can't stand the slow burn of real growth. It wants shortcuts. It wants hacks. It wants to skip the middle and jump straight to the reward. This obsession with outcome also creates pressure and perfectionism. If you're only focused on the result, then any small failure feels like a threat to your identity. You can't enjoy experimenting because everything has to work. You can't enjoy learning because mistakes feel unacceptable. And that's exactly how the ego traps you. By tying your worth to your wins and ignoring the richness of the process. When you're in love with the process, you're free. You're not just chasing something. You're becoming something. Every day becomes meaningful because every step holds value, even if it's messy, slow, or invisible to others. You stop obsessing over when the breakthrough will come because you trust that it's already happening with every rep, every journal entry, every uncomfortable conversation, every late night of effort. The ego doesn't want that kind of trust. It's not interested in becoming. It only wants proving. It doesn't care how deep your roots are, only how tall your branches look. But depth is what sustains you when results are delayed. Depth is what keeps you grounded when applause fades. And depth can only be built in the process, not at the finish line. 7. Ego hides behind perfectionism. Perfectionism is one of the ego's cleverest disguises. It presents itself as high standards, attention to detail, or wanting to get things just right. But underneath that polished mask is fear, deep, raw fear of being judged, of failing, of being seen as not good enough. The ego whispers, you can't share it yet, it's not ready, or wait until it's perfect, then you'll be safe. And so you wait, you edit, you hesitate. you stall. And life starts to pass by while your dreams sit on hold. Perfectionism isn't about excellence. It's about control. It's the ego's way of trying to manage how others perceive you. If everything looks flawless, no one can criticize you. If you never make a mistake, no one can reject you. That's the illusion the ego sells. But in reality, perfectionism doesn't protect you. It paralyzes you. It keeps you stuck in planning mode, rewriting, overthinking, second-guessing, all while robbing you of momentum, creativity, and courage. What perfectionism really reveals is a fear of vulnerability, because to put something out into the world before it's perfect means allowing others to see your process, your flaws, your humanness. And the ego can't handle that kind of exposure. It wants applause, not authenticity. It wants control over how the world sees you, not connection through realness. But true impact, true leadership, true artistry, true love comes from showing up as you are, not as you wish to appear. The cost of perfectionism is not just missed opportunities. It's missed growth. Because the truth is, you learn by doing, not by waiting. You grow by releasing imperfect work, not by holding back until it's polished. You build confidence through action, not delay. The ego will tell you that people only respect the perfect. But people don't connect with perfect. They connect with honest, raw, and real. And in your pursuit of perfection, you lose joy. You stop playing. You stop experimenting. You stop enjoying the ride because you're too busy tightening every loose end. And the irony, what we often love most in others are the imperfections, the cracks that let the light in. But the ego doesn't see that. It wants clean lines and no mistakes. It's afraid that your flaws make you unworthy, when in fact, they make you unforgettable. 8. The ego keeps score instead of building trust. The ego turns every relationship into a transaction. It constantly measures what it gave versus what it got. It tallies favors, attention, effort, and time, always watching to make sure it's not being taken advantage of. It says things like, I did this for them, so they better do something for me. Or, I showed up. Why didn't they? This kind of scoreboard mindset doesn't build connection, it breeds resentment. Because instead of loving, giving, or serving freely, the ego keeps a running tab that weighs down every interaction. When you're operating from ego, generosity becomes conditional. You offer help, but only if it's noticed. You listen, but only if they listen back. You give your time, but secretly expect praise, recognition, or a return favor. And when those invisible expectations go unmet, the ego gets bitter, it sulks, it withdraws. It silently accuses others of being ungrateful, while never questioning its own need for validation. That's not love, that's control. True trust is built on selflessness, not calculation. It's about giving without needing to be repaid. But the ego resists that because it feels unsafe. To trust someone without a guarantee, that feels like surrender, and the ego hates surrender. It wants leverage, not vulnerability. It wants to feel one step ahead, protected, in control. So it withholds real intimacy. It shows only curated parts of the self. It builds emotional contracts instead of real connection. In leadership, this scorekeeping mentality shows up as micromanaging, keeping tabs on who owes you loyalty, or quietly resenting those who don't pay back your investment in them. In friendships and family, it appears as guilt-tripping, one-upping, or passive-aggressive reminders of past favors. But this kind of emotional bookkeeping doesn't strengthen relationships, it poisons them. Because real trust can't grow in the soil of expectation. It only thrives where there's freedom. The soul, on the other hand, doesn't keep score. It gives because giving is who it is. It shows up not to be seen, but because it's the right thing to do. It believes in mutual respect, but it doesn't demand constant validation. It can serve in silence, love without credit, and help without highlighting it. The ego sees that as weakness, but in truth, it's the deepest form of strength. Because when you stop keeping score, you start building trust that actually lasts. 9. Ego seeks control. But control is an illusion. The ego is obsessed with control. It wants to dictate outcomes, manage people's perceptions, predict every twist and turn, and protect you from anything uncertain. It clings tightly to routines, expectations, and plans. Not because it's organized, but because it fears the unknown. To the ego, letting go feels like weakness. Surrender feels like failure. So it keeps you gripping everything, your image, your relationships, your timeline, with white-knuckled intensity. But life doesn't operate on the ego's terms. The harder you try to control everything, the more resistance you encounter. You start to micromanage your day, your work, even the people around you. You stop trusting others because your ego tells you, no one will do it right unless you do it yourself. You stop trusting the process because if it doesn't happen your way, you believe it's going wrong. That obsession with control eventually leads to burnout, anxiety, frustration, and strained relationships. Because nothing, and no one, can live under constant pressure and scrutiny. What the ego doesn't understand is that control is fragile. It breaks the moment life throws the unexpected your way. A job falls through, a relationship shifts, a plan unravels. And suddenly the ego panics. It blames others, it spirals, it catastrophizes. Because it never learned how to flow. It only learned how to grip. But life is not something to be managed like a to-do list. It's something to be partnered with. Something to trust. Something to listen to. The soul doesn't crave control. It craves alignment. It doesn't need every detail to go exactly as planned. It moves with faith, flexibility, and openness. It understands that detours often lead to better destinations, and that not getting what you want is sometimes the greatest protection. But the ego doesn't see that. It wants guarantees. It wants insurance before it invests. It wants promises before it surrenders. And so it hesitates. It delays. It pushes and forces and resists, thinking it's being strong when it's actually just afraid. Control can give the illusion of safety, but it often costs you peace. You become so focused on managing outcomes that you miss the joy of the present. You overlook the beauty in spontaneity, in mystery, in divine timing. The ego sees uncertainty as danger, but uncertainty is often where the magic is. The most meaningful moments are rarely planned. They're felt, lived, and discovered in the spaces where control has been released. 10. Your ego avoids silence because truth lives there. The ego thrives on noise. It feeds on distraction, stimulation, constant movement. It loves the sound of its own voice, the scroll of social media, the buzz of business. It keeps you occupied, not because there's always something important to do, but because silence feels threatening. In silence, there's no one to impress, nothing to prove, no audience to perform for. And that terrifies the ego, because silence forces you to meet yourself without the masks. In the stillness, the truth shows up about your fears, your doubts, your pain, your deepest desires. It's in the silence where you confront the questions you've been avoiding. Am I truly happy? Am I aligned with what matters? What am I running from? But the ego doesn't want those questions answered. It would rather keep you distracted. It would rather keep you numbed by achievement, overwhelmed by schedules, or lost in comparison, because that noise drowns out the quiet whisper of your soul. That whisper. It's not loud, but it's honest. It doesn't flatter. It convicts. It doesn't entertain. It awakens. And the ego resists that awakening Because awakening means change. It means responsibility. It means no longer hiding behind excuses or performance. So instead of silence, the ego fills your world with chatter, overthinking, external validation, self-criticism, or mindless consumption. Anything to keep you from sitting with the truth that lies beneath the surface. But the truth is, silence isn't empty. It's full of clarity, insight, direction, healing. It's where your greatest breakthroughs begin. Some of your most powerful realizations won't come from books or advice, but from being still long enough to hear what your inner wisdom has been trying to say all along. But the ego keeps the volume turned up, not just on the outside, but in your mind. Racing thoughts, worry loops, and endless noise disguised as productivity. Those who fear silence often fear themselves. Because in the quiet, you see what's real. You see where you've been lying to yourself, where you're out of alignment, where healing is needed. But you also see your potential. You see your worth beyond performance. You see the vision that's been buried beneath noise. The ego doesn't want you to see that. Because once you do, you no longer need it to protect or promote you. You realize that your power doesn't come from what you prove. It comes from who you are when no one's watching.